It was June 18, 1972, when the Henderson family, James, Clara, and their two children, Emily and Samuel, vanished from their modest home in Amarillo, Texas. The neighborhood had been quiet that evening, the sun dipping low behind the flat plains, painting long shadows. Friends remembered the laughter of the children echoing the backyard only hours earlier, and neighbors noted the couple had seemed tense yet outwardly calm. By nightfall, the house was eerily silent, and when the family failed to appear at the local grocery store the next morning, alarm began to ripple through the small community. Initial reports described an empty home, doors locked from the inside, windows intact, and no sign of forced entry, an impossible disappearance. Local authorities were immediately dispatched, but the investigation quickly encountered its first obstacle. Patrol logs had been oddly altered, and the neighbors' calls were misfiled in police registers. Surveillance cameras at a nearby gas station had been inexplicably erased for the night in question, leaving no visual trail of the family or potential abductor vehicle. Even more troubling were dispatch records showing officers patrolling routes that were inconsistent with their assigned beats. Early interviews with neighbors revealed little. Witnesses claimed to hear nothing unusual, and the sense of unease grew as investigators began to suspect that someone on the inside manipulated. Days turned into weeks, and Amarillo's law enforcement felt the public desperate for answers. Volunteers scoured surrounding fields and riverbanks, but only fragments of personal items were found. An abandoned shoe near a dirt road, a charred toy in a ditch, but none belonged definitively to the Henderson. Every lead seemed to vanish into thin air. Senior officers whispered about the growing suspicion that the case involved more than a simple kidnapping. There were rumors of organized crime rings operating in West Texas during the early 1970s, using small towns as safe havens for illicit activity. Yet connecting these whispers to the disappearance proved impossible without hard evidence. Corruption slowly surfaced as an invisible barrier to justice. Certain officers were allegedly in collusion with local criminal networks, and investigators realized that key witnesses had been threatened into silence. Municipal records were incomplete or conveniently missing, property transfers went unrecorded, and tips that might have led to breakthroughs disappeared from official channels. The local district attorney's office, once considered a pillar of community trust, was now under suspicion for dismissing or delaying critical case filing. Every attempt to uncover the Hendersons' fate seemed sabotaged from within the system itself. By the third month, federal attention was drawn to the case. The FBI began reviewing old patrol logs, correspondence, and the sparse physical evidence, bringing in modern investigative techniques that had not existed in 1972. Satellite imagery reconstruction, even from archived aerial photographs, revealed unusual vehicle movements in the weeks surrounding the disappearance. Investigators noticed tire tracks leading to abandoned warehouses on the outskirts of Amarillo and faint signs of disturbed earth near storage facilities. This technical evidence hinted that the family's disappearance was neither random nor isolated. It was calculated, deliberate, and carefully. Despite the growing sophistication of the investigation, years passed. False leads, dead ends, and misdirection wore down the team, and the case grew colder by the decade. Every tip seemed to be either a trap or a coincidence, and the involvement of syndicate-affiliated officials made progress nearly impossible. Yet one thread persisted. Rumors of a low-level enforcer who had handled sensitive transport operations for a larger criminal network. If he could be found, investigators believed he might be the key to finally unraveling the mystery of what had happened to James, Clara, Emily, and Samuel Henderson on that fateful June night. By the mid-1980s, the disappearance of the Henderson family had become a cold case, filed away in dusty cabinet as one of Amarillo's most haunting mysteries. Federal agents reopened the investigation with a new perspective, employing technological advances that had been unavailable in the 1970s. They began reanalyzing crime scene photos, old patrol logs, and witness statements, looking for discrepancies that might have been overlooked. Even decades-old soil samples revealing traces of chemicals consistent with embalming agent, suggesting that the family may have been held captive or worse. Each technical clue hinted at a larger, more sinister operation. Investigators discovered that the syndicate operating in Amarillo had deep roots in both the city and surrounding counties. It was a network that had infiltrated law enforcement, local government, and even the utilities department. Corrupt officers had falsified patrol logs and destroyed evidence, while city officials had knowingly misfiled property records to conceal the locations where victims were held. Surveillance cameras that might have captured vital movements were deliberately disabled, and even emergency calls made by neighbors were mysteriously lost in dispatch archives. The case was no longer just a disappearance, it was a masterclass in criminal cover-up. As the investigation continued, the FBI uncovered several warehouses and storage yards that had long been abandoned but were once key locations for the syndicate's operation. Ground-penetrating radar revealed areas where soil had been disturbed, and forensic technicians documented faint traces of blood and reconstruction of vehicle movements using old navigation and traffic data suggested that a black 1971 Ford van had been used repeatedly for transporting kidnapped individuals. Each piece of evidence slowly created a chilling portrait. The Henderson family's disappearance had been meticulously orchestrated, and those responsible had exploited decades of influence to ensure the trail went cold. The investigation hit its first breakthrough when the team traced financial records connected to the syndicate's operation. Payments had been made to local officials, officers, and even a few retired judges, ensuring their silence. Patterns emerged showing that these corrupt accomplices had actively redirected investigations, destroyed evidence, and misled federal inquiry. Despite these revelations, identifying the individuals directly involved in the abduction remained elusive, as many syndicate members had long retired, gone into hiding, or assumed new identity. Yet a critical lead emerged. A man named Vince Marlowe, a low-level enforcer, had been seen in multiple locations linked to the disappearance and was still believed to be alive. Over the next several months, undercover surveillance began on Marlowe. Agents tracked his movements discreetly, analyzing his connections to remaining syndicate members and monitoring financial transactions. He frequented rural Texas properties and occasionally met with elderly associates in secret. It became clear that Marlowe held critical knowledge of the Henderson, including the locations where the family had been kept, and possibly the final fate of a member. His age and careful secrecy had allowed him to evade detection for decades, but the federal team recognized that capturing him could finally crack the case wide open. By the end of 1986, the task force had pieced together enough corroborative evidence to plan a tactical operation. They coordinated surveillance, stakeouts, and covert observation of Marlowe's movement. Every meeting he attended was recorded, every vehicle he used was monitored, and every interaction analyzed. Investigators prepared for a high-stakes capture, aware that Marlowe might resist or disappear entirely. After more than a decade of frustration, false leads, and bureaucratic interference, federal agents were on the brink of confronting the first living link to the Henderson family's mysterious appearance, holding the promise of truth that had been denied for 50 years. The capture operation was set for March 12, 1987. On a remote ranch outside Amarillo that Marlowe had recently purchased under an alias. Agents moved with military precision, establishing perimeter control and monitoring all access points, night vision and drone. The ranch, surrounded by barbed wire, sparse scrubland, offered Marlowe the preferred, but also the vulnerability investigation. Inside the compound, old barns and storage sheds were meticulously maintained, with evidence of recent activity suggesting he was still actively involved in syndicate operation. Every detail was documented in advance, from his daily routine to the location of hidden entry. When Marlowe arrived, nondescript, unaware of the federal surveillance team, plainclothes agents positioned themselves along access roads, while uniformed officers secured the perimeter to prevent escape. Inside the barn, Marlowe's loyal associates were quickly neutralized and detained without incident. Marlowe himself, initially attempting to flee through a hidden side door, was intercepted and restrained after a brief foot chase across the dusty terrain. For the first time in decades, a key member of the criminal network directly linked to the Henderson disappearance was in federal custody. Transported under heavy protection to a secure federal facility, Marlowe was isolated from outside influence. Interrogators began the process of establishing rapport while presenting the overwhelming evidence against him: financial records, altered dispatch logs, surveillance data, and documented connections to the syndicate's operation. Marlowe's initial response was defiance. He denied involvement in the Henderson, claiming ignorance, suggesting the family had voluntarily disappeared. Yet agents knew he was bluffing. The technical evidence was irrefutable, and every lead pointed back to him as a central figure in the abduction and subsequent cover-up. The turning point came when Marlowe realized his options were dwindling. Syndicate protection no longer existed. Many members had been died or retired quietly. Federal prosecutors made it clear full cooperation could save him from life imprisonment without parole and offer protection against potential retribution. Faced with the choice between remaining loyal to a defunct criminal network, ensuring his own survival, he agreed to speak, but only under immunity. Investigators sensed the gravity of what was about to unfold. Marlowe's initial statements revealed chilling operational details. He described how the Henderson family had been intercepted just outside their home, forced into a black van, and driven to a remote storage facility. He admitted that corrupt law enforcement officers had assisted in diverting patrols and falsifying reports to mislead local and federal investigators. Cameras had been disabled, logbooks tampered with, and evidence deliberately destroyed. The scope of the cover-up was staggering, and Marlowe's cooperation promised to reveal not only what had happened that night, but also the decades-long web of deception surrounding the disappearance. By the end of the first week of interrogation, Marlowe had provided a preliminary outline of events that night, highlighting the syndicate's careful orchestration of the family's capture and concealment. Federal investigators, armed with his testimony, began mapping out potential locations for recovery operations and identifying the corrupt officials involved. For the first time since June 18, 1972, the trail of the Henderson family was no longer cold. The investigation, once stymied's lead internal corruption, was finally moving toward a breakthrough justice. Under intensive questioning, Vince Marlowe began recounting the night of June 18, 1972, with an unnerving clarity, revealing details that sent chills through the interrogation. He explained how the Hendersons had been specifically targeted because James Henderson, a local accountant, had uncovered fraudulent dealings within the syndicate's Texas operation. The abduction had been intended as leverage, a warning to ensure silence. Marlowe described watching the family from a distance, noting the children playing in the yard and Clara tending to her flower beds, completely unaware of the danger lurking mere meters away. According to Marlowe, the operation was executed with precise coordination. Associates in black vehicles blocked nearby streets while he approached the family, feigning authority as an officer from a neighboring jurisdiction. Emily and Samuel screamed, but the adults were restrained quickly and quietly. Marlowe admitted he had personally loaded the family into a nondescript van, covering the children's eyes to prevent recognition of the abductors. The entire scene had been captured on no cameras, as previously disabled surveillance ensured there would be no evidence of the initial encounter. The meticulousness of the operation revealed a level of planning that had eluded investigators for decades. The family was transported to a remote storage facility, chosen for its isolation and ties to corrupt law enforcement allies. Marlowe described how several deputies, later identified through altered patrol logs and falsified reports, had intentionally rerouted local patrols and delayed response time. He confessed that these officials received consistent payments and favors, guaranteeing no interference. Inside the facility, the Hendersons were held in separate rooms, blindfolded and restrained. They were fed minimally, and attempts by the children to escape were met with threats and force. Marlowe's admission painted a cruel and deliberate captivity, orchestrated to maintain control and prevent the family's rescue. Weeks passed, and Marlowe detailed the grim fate of James and Clara. The syndicate's impatience grew as local authorities seemed too slow to cooperate in silencing the accountant. On a night lit only by lanterns, the parents were murdered quietly to eliminate risk, their bodies concealed beneath a hidden floor panel. Emily and Samuel, however, were moved to a secondary location, a farmhouse in a remote area controlled by a corrupt retired officer, where they were held for longer leverage. Marlowe admitted his horror as he watched the children endure months of confinement, yet he remained complicit under threat of death from the syndicate leadership. Marlowe's confession also revealed the intricate cover-up designed to mislead investigators for decades. Dispatch logs were altered to show patrols in different locations, evidence was destroyed or fabricated, and city officials knowingly misfiled documents. Surveillance footage, where it had existed, erased or tampered with, and any tips from the public had been suppressed by a network of bribed or intimidated authorities. Technical evidence previously deemed lost, soil samples, aerial imagery, and vehicle navigation patterns, was now contextualized, showing deliberate interference at every stage of the original investigation. Finally, Marlowe provided the federal team with precise locations of the hidden sites and detailed the eventual fate of the children. Emily and Samuel had survived years of captivity, but had been relocated multiple times before being confined in a remote cellar beneath a farmhouse. Marlowe's maps and recollections allowed investigators to plan a recovery operation with certainty for the first time. His confession, cruel in its transparency, exposed the full extent of organized crime's manipulation, the complicity of corrupt officials, and the careful orchestration that had kept the Henderson family hidden and largely forgotten by the world for over 50 years. On April 3, 1987, federal agents initiated the recovery operation at the remote farmhouse identified by Marlowe. The early morning air was thick with mist. The surrounding scrubland offered little cover, making the operation tense, highly vulnerable. Tactical teams moved silently across the property, guided by Marlowe's precise direction, while surveillance drones monitored possible escape routes. Inside, agents found the structure heavily reinforced with makeshift locks, dirt floors, and barricaded rooms, a grim testament to decades of secrecy and cruelty. The anticipation palpable. No one knew the condition of the children after years of isolation. The team discovered Emily and Samuel in a concealed basement chamber, surviving but emaciated and traumatized. The children, now in their early 50s, were in shock, their eyes wide with fear and disbelief as strangers in tactical gear approached. Federal psychologists immediately began providing support while agents meticulously documented the scene. Evidence of prolonged captivity was everywhere. Discarded blankets, faint markings on walls tracking days, and rationed food containers. Every object, no matter how small, corroborated Marlowe's confession, confirming that the syndicate had orchestrated a decades-long concealment of the Henderson sibling. Outside the farmhouse, agents apprehended the retired deputy who had facilitated the operation, along with several remaining syndicate affiliates hiding on the property. These individuals had assumed new identities and hoped the decades had erased accountability. Instead, Marlowe's cooperation, technical evidence, and federal persistence ensured their capture. The arrest operation was executed without violence. The psychological intensity weighed heavily on both the recovered family member and the law enforcement personnel, who had spent years piecing together. Back at the federal facility, investigators cross-referenced Marlowe's information with recovered artifacts. Soil samples from the basement matched decades-old traces found near the family's original home. Tattered personal items, once thought lost, were cataloged and linked definitively to the Hendersons through forensic analysis. Tampered logs and falsified patrol reports were juxtaposed with satellite reconstructions and historical vehicle tracking data, producing a full, undeniable timeline. The meticulous documentation not only confirmed the events of June 18, 1972, but also validated the systemic corruption that had allowed the syndicate to operate unchecked for over half a century. Marlowe continued providing testimony, offering chilling insights into the syndicate's inner workings. He described how threats, bribes, and intimidation had ensured local officials complied with the criminal network, suppressing evidence and misleading investigations. Agents discovered hidden stashes of documents and ledgers, proving decades of illicit financial operation, further implicating high-ranking city officials and law enforcement members who had participated in the cover-up. The layers of deception were staggering, showing how meticulously the Henderson family had been erased from public awareness. Finally, with Emily and Samuel safely recovered, federal authorities prepared the groundwork for formal arrests and prosecution. Syndicate leaders, corrupt officials, and enablers were systematically identified, their decades-long protection network unraveling. The operation marked the first true breakthrough in a case that had haunted Amarillo for 51 years, delivering both relief and somber reflection. For the Henderson siblings, federal agents, and the family, the long shadow of fear and uncertainty is beginning to lift, yet the scars of betrayal, captivity, and lost decades would remain indelible for the rest of their lives. Following the successful recovery of Emily and Samuel Henderson, federal prosecutors moved quickly to bring the remaining syndicate leaders and corrupt officials to justice. Indictments were filed against Vincent Marlowe, Harold Harry Jennings, retired Deputy Carl Whitman, and several others who had facilitated the decades-long conspiracy. Courtrooms in Amarillo were filled with journalists, investigators, and family members, all eager to witness the reckoning of a criminal network that had eluded accountability for more than 50 years. The trials promised to expose not only the chilling details of the Henderson disappearance, but also the pervasive corruption that had shielded perpetrators for generations. Marlowe's testimony became the cornerstone of the prosecution. Under federal protection, he recounted every detail of the abduction, captivity, and eventual concealment of the Henderson family. His accounts were cruelly precise. The way James and Clara had been silenced, the manipulation of local patrols, the falsified evidence, and the routine threats made to ensure the siblings' isolation. Prosecutors paired his testimony with decades of technical evidence, soil samples, tampered logs, vehicle tracking data, and recovered personal effects, creating a compelling and irrefutable case against the syndicate and its corrupt enablers. The defense attempted to undermine Marlowe, arguing that his decades-long participation made him an unreliable witness motivated solely by self-preservation. They contended that technical evidence had degraded over time and that memories could not be trusted. However, the meticulous documentation of logs, verified financial transfers, and forensic confirmations of recovered items made the defense's arguments increasingly untenable. Every tampered log, every falsified report, and every corrupted official named by Marlowe added weight to the prosecution's narrative, leaving the jury with little room for doubt. Testimonies from investigators and forensic experts further corroborated Marlowe's statements. Agents explained the painstaking work required to reconstruct vehicle movement, map hidden confinement sites, and trace historical property ownership tied to the syndicate. Psychological evaluations of Emily and Samuel documented the enduring trauma caused by their prolonged captivity, illustrating the human cost behind the criminal operation. Each revelation painted a vivid picture of systemic corruption, illustrating how ordinary institutions had been subverted to hide one of Amarillo's most notorious crimes. After weeks of testimony, the jury delivered verdicts that reverberated throughout. Marlowe reduced sentence in exchange for full cooperation, though he remained incarcerated under federal protection. Syndicate leaders, including Jennings and Whitman, were sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Lesser members of the criminal network received varying terms depending on their involvement, while retired officials implicated in the conspiracy faced charges ranging from obstruction of justice to bribery and conspiracy. Justice, though long delayed, had finally been served. For the Henderson family, the courtroom proceedings provided both closure and bittersweet reflection. Emily and Samuel, now in their mid-50s, expressed gratitude toward the investigators who had persisted for decades, yet their faces bore the indelible marks of trauma. Family members and surviving friends confronted the painful reality of time and stolen years. Agents, many retired, reflected on the decades of frustration, false leads, and emotional burden, knowing that the dismantling of the syndicate had come at a tremendous human cost. While legal justice had been achieved, the emotional consequences would linger for a lifetime. The impact of the Henderson case rippled far beyond the courtroom, reshaping Amarillo's perception of law enforcement and local governance. The small Texas city, once proud of its close-knit community, struggled to reconcile decades of trust violated by corruption. Citizens demanded accountability from municipal authorities, and public hearings were held to expose systemic failures that had allowed the syndicate to operate unhindered. Even officials not directly involved faced scrutiny for failing to report suspicious activity. The revelations sparked debates about oversight, integrity, and the fragility of institutions meant to protect the public. Investigators who had dedicated years, and in some cases decades, to the case reflected on the toll it had taken. Many had experienced burnout, professional frustration, and personal guilt for the leads that had gone cold due to tampering. Yet seeing Emily and Samuel finally safe provided a rare sense of fulfillment. Agents continued to advise on reforms, recommending enhanced audit mechanisms, stricter surveillance protocols, and community engagement strategies to prevent future cover-ups. Their efforts underscored that solving the crime was only one step. Rebuilding trust required ongoing vigilance and transparency. Emily and Samuel faced a delicate journey of reintegration into society after decades of isolation. Their adult lives had been irrevocably shaped by captivity, and therapy was essential for navigating deep sea. Yet the siblings expressed gratitude toward the team that had never abandoned. Family gatherings, long deferred by uncertainty, finally took place, blending joy and sorrow in equal. Each reunion reminded them of what had been lost and what had been reserved, offering a fragile but meaningful sense of closure amid lingering scars. Local authorities were forced to confront their complicity, and a wave of resignations followed. Investigations into past misconduct uncovered additional malfeasance, including falsified reports in unrelated cases. The ripple effect of the Henderson case strengthened oversight in Amarillo, with new policies implemented to protect whistleblowers and ensure independent review of missing persons. The city collectively faced the uncomfortable truth that decades of assumed safety had been illusory and that corruption had thrived in plain sight. Meanwhile, the syndicate's remnants were dismantled entirely. Properties, assets, and financial networks were seized, while federal agencies monitored ongoing activity to prevent reemergence. Marlowe, though under federal custody, became a key consultant for law enforcement, aiding in the capture of remaining associates and ensuring knowledge of the network's inner workings was preserved. His cooperation, while morally ambiguous, proved essential in delivering justice, highlighting the complex interplay, survival, culpability, and accountability within crime. For the community and investigators alike, the case remained a cautionary tale. It underscored the devastating consequences of institutional failure, the resilience required to pursue long-delayed justice, and the enduring human impact of crime hidden beneath layers of deceit. While the Henderson family had been recovered and the syndicate dismantled, the emotional and societal repercussions lingered. Amarillo would never be the same, forever marked by the shadow of one family's disappearance and the decades-long struggle to unearth a truth long concealed by corruption and fear. After the trials, federal agents returned to the properties identified by Marlowe to recover remaining evidence and artifacts tied to the Henderson. Old storage barns, dirt-filled basements, and hidden compartments were meticulously excavated, revealing decades-old personal effects, journals, and photographs belonging to James, Clara, Emily, and Samuel. Forensic analysis confirmed the authenticity of these items, providing a tangible connection to a past that had been obscured by corruption and organized crime. Each recovered object told a fragment of the family's story, offering insight into their final days and the conditions of their captivity. Investigators also discovered hidden caches of financial ledgers detailing the syndicate's decades-long operations, including bribes, intimidation payments, and off-the-books transactions to ensure local compliance. These documents implicated additional minor players, retired city officials, law enforcement aides, and businesses who had previously evaded scrutiny. Marlowe's cooperation had provided the blueprint, but the painstaking recovery process revealed the depth of the syndicate's infiltration into Amarillo's social and political fabric. Every ledger, map, and document reconstructed a network of that had successfully manipulated public trust for over half a century. Emily and Samuel, though relieved by the tangible evidence of their parents' fate, were forced to confront the enduring trauma of their confinement. Therapy sessions were combined with careful exposure to the recovered artifacts, allowing them to piece together fragmented memories with objective confirmation of events. They revisited sites of past captivity under supervision, reconciling memory with evidence, and slowly rebuilding a sense of control over a life that had been stolen. The recovery of personal items, while painful, also provided moments of closure, transforming abstract memories into concrete understanding. Meanwhile, prosecutors used the newly recovered evidence to reinforce cases against secondary conspirators who had supported the syndicate or actively participated in the cover-up. The documentation left by the organization exposed the mechanisms of their control: financial coercion, falsified reports, and threats against whistleblowers. Additional arrests were carried out quietly but effectively, targeting individuals who had been shielded by time and obscurity. Each conviction contributed to dismantling remaining threads of the criminal network, ensuring that the Henderson case would no longer be a tool of fear or secrecy. Marlowe, still under federal protection, continued to provide testimony on complex syndicate operation that extended beyond the Henderson case. He described methods of communication, contingency plans, and contingency threats that had been implemented to safeguard members from prosecution. Investigators cataloged these strategies meticulously, creating a manual for dismantling similar networks in the future. While morally complicated, Marlowe's input was invaluable, translating decades of criminal ingenuity into lessons for law enforcement and criminal justice reform. As the months passed, the Henderson siblings began tentative steps toward normalcy. Public recognition of their ordeal was bittersweet, blending relief and sorrow in a city long haunted by the mystery. Investigators, prosecutors, and family members reflected on the persistence and patience required to bring the case to a conclusion. While the physical recovery of evidence had provided factual closure, the emotional journey remained ongoing. The story of the Henderson family became a landmark in federal investigative history, a testament to perseverance, a study in corruption, and a reminder that justice, though delayed, can eventually illuminate even the darkest corners of human cruelty. The final arrests of syndicate leaders and corrupt officials were carried out in a coordinated operation spanning multiple counties in Texas. Federal agents, armed with Marlowe's testimony and the recovered evidence, moved decisively to apprehend those who had managed to evade justice for decades. Among the targets were Harold Jennings, a former city council member, and Carl Whitman, the retired deputy who had facilitated the long-term captivity of Emily and Samuel. Each arrest was executed quietly to avoid alerting remaining associates, though the sheer weight of the charges ensured these individuals could no longer hide behind their years of assumed immunity. Courtroom proceedings were tense and emotional. Marlowe's testimony detailed the orchestration of the Henderson family's disappearance, the deliberate manipulation of law enforcement, and the systematic cover-up that had allowed the syndicate to thrive. Evidence presented included tampered patrol logs, financial ledgers showing bribes to officials, recovered artifacts belonging to the family, and technical reconstructions of vehicle movement the night of the abduction. The jury was presented with an overwhelming narrative, decades of premeditated criminal activity, compounded by betrayal and corruption within institutions designed to protect the. Emily and Samuel attended the trials under federal protection, their presence a powerful reminder of the human consequences behind the document and testimony. Both siblings spoke briefly to the court, expressing gratitude to the investigators and law enforcement, while also describing the lasting emotional scars of their captivity. Their voices, though measured, resonated deeply with jurors, journalists, and courtroom observers alike. The courtroom became not just a venue for legal resolution, but a symbolic space for the reclaiming of decades-long stolen agency and dignity. Verdicts were delivered with resounding finality. Marlowe received a reduced sentence due to his cooperation, ensuring that he could provide critical insight into other criminal networks while remaining incarcerated. Jennings, Whitman, and the remaining high-ranking syndicate members were sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Additional conspirators received varying sentences based on their involvement, including obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and bribery. The legal system, long delayed by corruption and deception, had finally exacted accountability for crimes committed over 50 years prior. Public reaction in Amarillo was a mixture of relief and somber reflection. Media outlets chronicled the exhaustive investigation, highlighting the perseverance of investigators and the emotional toll on the Henderson family. Community forums and city council meetings discussed reforms, oversight, and the prevention of future corruption, acknowledging the collective failure of local institutions over decades. The city, while proud that justice had finally been served, could not entirely escape the shadow of betrayal that had plagued its history. Despite the legal resolution, a sense of lingering uncertainty remained. Emily and Samuel had been rescued, but decades of lost time, stolen experiences, and psychological trauma could never be fully restored. Agents and prosecutors who had dedicated years to the case experienced closure mixed with exhaustion and reflection, knowing that even after triumph, the human costs of corruption and crime leave indelible marks. Amarillo had seen justice achieved, but the emotional and societal repercussions of the Henderson family's ordeal would endure for generations. The final chapter of the Henderson case unfolded with both relief and profound melancholy. Emily and Samuel, now fully aware of their parents' tragic, faced the delicate task of reclaiming a life stolen from them decades earlier. While they could never recover the years of normalcy lost to captivity, therapy, familial support, and the unwavering dedication of federal agents provided a pathway to healing. Their first public statement, delivered in front of the courthouse, expressed gratitude to those who had persevered, while also acknowledging the lasting emotional scars that no amount of justice could erase. The Henderson case prompted systemic reforms in Amarillo and beyond. Federal oversight increased, policies were implemented to prevent tampering with patrol logs and evidence, and whistleblower protections were strengthened to ensure that future corruption could not thrive undetected. Investigators compiled lessons learned from Marlowe's cooperation, the syndicate's operational methods, and the decades of obstruction by officials. These insights became case studies for law and demonstrating the critical importance of persistence, technical expertise, and accountability in solving cold cases involving organized crime. Despite the arrests and covered evidence, some questions remained unanswered. While the whereabouts of the parents were known and confirmed, certain aspects of the syndicate's network, its finances, unrecorded communications, and undiscovered minor operatives remained elusive. Marlowe's testimony had illuminated a vast portion of the conspiracy, yet investigators knew that the criminal enterprise had likely extended further than they could ever fully trace. This lingering uncertainty served as a sobering reminder of the limits of justice and the permanence of some shadows in human history. Emily and Samuel's reintegration into society continued slowly, blending moments of triumph with echoes. They reconnected with distant relatives, traveled to cities they had never seen, and cautiously engaged with communities outside Amarillo. Though the siblings experienced moments of joy and liberation, anniversaries of the disappearance brought renewed grief, and the world outside was forever colored by the knowledge of what had been endured. These dual realities, freedom and loss, became the defining framework of their adult lives. The agents and prosecutors involved in the decades-long investigation found their personal and professional lives irrevocably altered. Some retired with a sense of accomplishment, tempered by the weight of the case's emotional toll, while others continued their work in criminal justice reform, driven by the knowledge that persistent corruption could only be countered by vigilance and unwavering integrity. For all involved, the Henderson family's rescue was a triumph tempered by reflection, illustrating that justice, even when achieved, cannot erase the human cost of prolonged cruelty and deception. In the quiet of Amarillo, the story of the Henderson family endured as a caution. A city, once complicit through silence or corruption, had witnessed the consequences of negligence and deceit. Yet, amid sorrow and loss, there remained a measure of closure. The siblings were free, the syndicate dismantled, and accountability delivered. Still, the shadow of the past lingered, a reminder that even decades later, Some mysteries leave traces of tragedy, shaping lives alone cannot fully. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, subscribe for more intense, thrilling crime stories.